All right. Hello and welcome to the video. My name is Wade Smith. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing the fact that there's some evidences that I've uncovered um, through scientific observation and query that the sun is actually somewhat older than scientists think, and also that the sun is in fact a first generation star, which I've been convinced of that for quite some time, but now I have a more refined argument for that. Uh, for example, and let me just explain that an object can be a first generation star and not necessarily be as old as other first generation stars. Let's say, for example, if you had a solar mass worth of unspent hydrogen in the middle of the universe, and it suddenly collapsed into a new star, that would still be a first generation star, even though it would be billions of years younger than other first generation stars. So I'm not necessarily saying that the sun is exactly the same age as the universe when I say that it's a first generation star. I'm just distinguishing because what they normally tell you in science class in high school and college is that the sun is a second generation star, that it was created by the supernova of another object. I'm going to start by debunking that right away. If the sun was a second generation star, it would actually need to be made mostly of oxygen, neon, and iron. Because if you look at the remnants of the Crab Nebula supernova, what do you see? You see oxygen, neon, and iron. All right. And you see a neutron star sitting in the middle of the Crab Nebula. But you also see, because the object that was there was about 10 or so times bigger than the sun, you see a couple solar masses worth of unspent helium. But mostly you see escaping the nebula, you see neon, oxygen, and iron. Um, So, in order to be a second generation star, the sun would have to be mostly made of those things. It's not. There's less than 1% iron in the entire solar system combined, and there's less than 1% oxygen and nitrogen combined in the entire solar system combined. There's about 10% carbon in the solar system, and I'm about to explain why, because the sun is in fact already burning helium into carbon, which I think Fred Hoyle would agree if he heard the argument I'm about to make. All right, let me start. Let me go to my paper where I've written this, because I'm actually going to publish a scientific paper making this argument whenever I get the mathematical formula more refined than what I have. All right. The group temperature, I say triple alpha process already happens inside the sun. Why isn't this obvious? That's what I entitled this post that I made online earlier. So I start by saying the group temperature of the sun's core is believed to be 16 million to 18.5 million kelvins. This is not enough to produce the triple alpha process at first glance, which is believed to require an average temperature of around 100 million kelvins. However, group temperature does not necessarily reflect the temperature of individual particles. This works similar to how ice can sublimate directly to vapor without being a liquid, or liquid water can vaporize below the boiling point group temperature. Inside the sun, it's possible for some helium atoms to have individual temperatures or kinetic energy exceeding 100 million kelvins for very brief periods of time, and then collide with other helium atoms. This should be obvious because it's a nuclear reactor. So, all right, then collide with other helium atoms, producing beryllium, carbon, nitrogen, and even oxygen. Nitrogen and oxygen make up about 1% of the sun's core mass for no apparent reason other than this fact. All right. For example, um, the CNO process is now known and confirmed via neutrino detectors to produce about 0.4% of the sun's total energy output, while the proton proton chain hydrogen fusion is thought to produce almost all of the remaining 99.6% of the sun's energy output. This is not necessarily the case, though, because small amounts of the triple alpha process can already be happening there, which explains where the carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen and other elements came from in the first place. I write, the way you are taught phase transitions in stars is wrong anyway. The sun does not burn out of hydrogen before the helium phase begins. Quite the contrary, the hydrogen phase stops burning because the helium phase has begun to be more powerful than the hydrogen phase. I write the triple alpha process will start in earnest when the sun is 80 to 90% depleted of hydrogen, and the hydrogen will continue fusion even as the early part of the red giant phase starts. Only once the helium to carbon burning phase or triple alpha process is 50% or more of the energy output would hydrogen then be blown away from the sun and wasted, which would signify the end of the red giant phase anyway. The red giant phase, because once you start blowing away the hydrogen at a certain rate and blowing away some of the helium, the internal pressure of the sun would go back down, and then the helium would no longer be able to burn. The red giant phase burns about 1,000 to 2,000 times brighter than the present day sun at the end of the event. Then it shrinks back to a white dwarf with a surface temperature a few tens of thousands of kelvins after all of that, which, if I remember correctly, the sun is around 6,000 Kelvin right now. Whereas the interior of the Earth is around 12,000 Kelvin. The core of the Earth is actually twice as hot as the surface temperature of the sun. So then I write also a small fraction of the sun's energy comes from annihilation of positrons and electrons, which happens at an insanely high energy density, around 100 times the energy density of hydrogen fusion itself. This could explain how helium and other atoms become energetic to produce the heavier isotopes in the sun, rather than the second generation star hypothesis, which I ask, where is the progenitor star? If the sun is a second generation star, what happened to the progenitor star that supposedly produced it? That there's never been an explanation of that, not even attempted to be offered by any of the atheist scientists who are arguing for the sun to be a second generation star. All right. Anyway, there are a couple of reasons I don't think the sun is a second generation. It is still too light, in my opinion, to be second generation. When you look at the Crab Nebula supernova, as I already mentioned, it is made of mostly oxygen, neon, and iron. Well, those elements only make up about 1% or so of the sun's mass, so it makes little sense to say that the sun is the second generation star. All right. Then further right, well, I've also realized that the iron and other heavy elements in the solar system could have come from a dredging up event of the sun, either because of some internal instability event inside the sun or because of a close encounter with another star. To give some idea of how colossal such an event would have been, it's probably the real physics-based origin of the planets, asteroids, and comets in the solar system. That is to say, it would be like a nova rather than a supernova. The core density of the sun is already believed to be a couple dozen times denser than iron on the surface of the Earth, so we can't really prove one way or another what the sun is really made of deep inside the core. Also, I see no good reason why heavier elements such as oxygen and iron couldn't have been made during the Big Bang event itself, since its energy level was many orders of magnitude larger than the most powerful types of supernovas. Even a hypernova is not as energetic as the Big Bang. So the Big Bang, to me, it seems like the Big Bang could have made any element on the real periodic table, including anything heavier than what we've discovered so far, if anything like that exists. Which we think there are at least two more elements that haven't been discovered on the periodic table. All right, so then I did an approximate calculation whereby I showed that the sun will run out of fuel when it is approximately 14 billion years old. Scientists think the sun and Earth are somewhere between 6 and 8 billion years old. They still use a 4.6 billion year figure in textbooks because they don't know how to date objects older than the asteroids yet. Computer simulations of the Earth's interior show it needs to be at least 6 billion years old to reach its current composition, as determined by ground penetrating radar and especially seismometers. So, if the Earth and Sun are 6 to 8 billion years old, this would roughly agree with the idea that the Sun will run out of fuel around 5.5 billion years from now. However, I did a linear approximation of the correct calculation there. The real calculation involves solving a differential involving a double exponential, which I confess I don't know how to solve correctly directly. And I don't think we were taught that in college either, because it was one of those beyond the scope of this course things. So instead, I calculated how long it would take for the sun to run out of fuel from start to finish if it burned at the same rate forever, which gave 14 billion years. In reality, the sun accelerates at its rate of burning by about 10% over the previous billion years and will accelerate again by more than 10% in the next billion years, etc. As the core density increases by 1%, the luminosity goes up by 4%. There's a well-known calculation that shows that the luminosity of a star is proportional to the fourth power of its mass. Well, if you don't vary mass, the luminosity of the star is proportional to the fourth power of its core density. So either way, if you increase the mass by 1%, the luminosity goes up by 4%. If you increase the core density by 1%, the luminosity also goes up by roughly 4%, which, by the way, should drive all life on Earth extinct by the time luminosity goes up by even 1%, except for the fact that radiation pressure from the sun would push the Earth farther away from the sun, cooling the Earth rather than warming it. This suggests the universe is twice as old as scientists think it is, because you need to explain where there are already so many white dwarfs, ranging from 10% to as much as 144% of the sun's mass, spread around the entire galaxy and universe. If it takes 14 billion years for a sun-like star to run out of fuel, where did all those white dwarfs come from, which make up over half the observable objects in the universe, if the universe was only 13.8 billion years old? This suggests the universe is twice as old as scientists think. For example, if solar luminosity went up by 1%, then the solar constant on Earth would go up by 13.655 watts per meter squared, which would melt all ice caps, thermalize the permafrost, and fry the entire planet, if the Earth didn't move farther away from the sun anyway. But by the time the sun gets that much brighter, radiation pressure and systemic mass loss, in other words, the photons escaping the sun are loss of mass, therefore the sun's gravity goes down, therefore the Earth gradually escapes the sun. Will it push the Earth farther away from the sun? Another reason the Earth will move farther away from the sun is gravity waves from Jupiter push the Earth and other inner planets outward over hundreds of millions and billions of years. Thus, it is possible that Revelation, the book in the Bible, is correct. By the time the sun is, quote, 7 times brighter, the Earth will be about 3 times farther away from the sun, and it will need the sun to be brighter to maintain a safe living temperature for Earth life, at least if life is anything like what lives today. So, in other words, by the time the sun is literally 7 times brighter, the Earth would be 3 times farther away, and therefore would receive 1/9 of the sunlight. So then would actually be cooler than it is today rather than warmer. How could humans survive this change, especially if, as John said, the oceans will dry up? Well, the Bible is talking about resurrected immortal humans who are spirit beings like the angels, not flesh and blood humans like us today. Yes, I'm aware the surface temperature of the sun goes down as it expands, but the luminosity, which determines the temperature felt on Earth, goes up as the sun's core contracts and the sun's atmosphere, radiative zone, and convective zones expands. So there is no contradiction between revelation and real modern science. And then I finally say there is no chance of collision with Jupiter because Earth and Jupiter don't orbit on exactly the same plane, and because Jupiter is over 300 times as massive as Earth. Therefore, Jupiter only needs to move inward by about 1 million miles to throw Earth outward by 300 million miles, which would not even reflect a 1% realignment of the solar system's mass. End discussion. All right. So, I'm pretty sure that this proves that the universe needs to be about twice as old as the mainstream theory says it is for anything to make sense. Because where did so many of the extinct white dwarfs and extinct neutron stars in the universe come from, unless the universe is much older than the standard model? Or at least somewhat older than the standard model. If it takes 14 billion years for a sun-like star to run out of energy, where did all the white dwarfs come from, since the universe in the standard model is not even 14 billion years old? See, that's a problem with the standard model. Not a problem with Fred Hoyle's work. It's a problem with what atheists have done with Fred Hoyle's work. Because remember, Fred Hoyle told you that only worked if God did it. And the atheists rejected Fred Hoyle. And George Lemaitre told you the Big Bang only worked because God did it that way. And the atheists rejected George Lemaitre. Well, I can tell you in the book of Revelation, they give 3 signs that only God could have known 1800 to 1900 years ago. How to build a city 1,200 miles by 1,200 miles by 1,200 miles. You need diamond for the foundation. The definition of what a black hole and a wormhole are, the bottomless pit, which wasn't known scientifically until the late 1800s. And then the sun's red giant phase, the sun being 7 times brighter, and the oceans of the earth boiling away. was not known scientifically until Fred Hoyle's time. And again, he told you that only worked because God did it that way. So I have thoroughly debunked atheism. I have proven Bible prophecy correct scientifically. And I've proven that God is even greater. That only makes God greater. If the universe is older than you thought it was, that could only make the creator of the universe greater, not less. It doesn't lessen God just because humans misunderstood all this time. As I pointed out, since God is self-eternal, the first cause has to be self-eternal, otherwise nothing else would exist. Then the first cause has to be greater than anything you can comprehend. God could have been creating the universe forever, for all we know. And yet, that does not make the universe itself self-eternal. Because to be self-eternal, it has to be eternal without any outside influence, which it's not, because the law of entropy forbids that from being the case. Let me do the entropy argument and the cosmological argument also, all in one video, so atheists won't have any argument against this. In the law of entropy, no matter what happens, every interaction in the universe can only push the entropy of the universe up. So that over time, at least assuming the universe was not being continually recreated by God, if the universe was supposedly static, it could not be static indefinitely, because eventually it would reach a condition of maximal entropy, and then no further mechanical work could exist in the universe. Now, also, the first law of thermodynamics is bogus. All right, I don't know what else to tell anybody. It's a crackpot. It's a crackpot axiom. It's not true. It's not even an axiom. It's a falsehood. The first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. Well, what do you think dark energy is? Dark energy is energy coming into the universe because it's being created somewhere outside the universe. That's what dark energy is. So the very existence of dark energy, which we can prove now, proves the first law of thermodynamics wrong. Doesn't prove God did anything wrong. It proves that man's interpretation of the laws of the universe are wrong. All right. The cosmological argument states that everything which began to exist must have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And then we observe that the first cause must be self-eternal because it couldn't be caused by something before itself. That would be a contradiction. So the first cause must be self-eternal. It must be uncaused, as I already pointed out. And then it must be entirely self-motivated because nothing outside of itself existed yet to decide to do anything. So the only thing that can be self-motivated is a free moral agent. Therefore, the first cause is uncaused, self-motivated, and self-eternal. What is that? That's a mind, believe it or not. A spirit mind, which the Bible tells you God is a spirit and must be worshipped in spirit and in truth. All right, so atheism is thoroughly debunked as being completely unscientific, not only wrong, but completely unscientific. All right, and that's the end of the video because I've covered the topics that I wanted to discuss. I've covered the real nature of the sun. I covered how that ties into the biblical prophecy and how that ties into the origin of the universe being God, not the other way around. Because atheists think God is something man invented, but in reality, man is something God invented.